to feed?
Priorities.
That's right.
Okay, it's 6 o'clock. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am Dee Buckstaff. I'm a member of the Wyoming League of Women Voters. Tonight's forum is sponsored by the Wyoming League of Women Voters, Teton County Library, KHOL, WyoFile, Jackson Hole News and Guide, and Buck Rail. We are going to begin the evening with an icebreaker question posed to the county commission candidates, which are Natalia Duncan-Macker, Greg Epstein, Peter Long, Christian Beckwith, and Wes Gardner. After the answers, our media panel will begin to ask questions. Our media panel consists of Robin Vincent from KHOL, Billy Arnold from the Jackson Hole News and Guide, and Lindsay Vallon from Buck Rail. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the questions on a rotating basis so that everyone gets a chance to go first. Susan Dong, another member of the Wyoming League of Women Voters, is our timekeeper tonight, and she will indicate when time is running out so candidates can sum up their answers. Each candidate also has 1 red card to use at any time worth up to 2 minutes, and they can be used as the candidate sees fit. If audience members are interested in proposing questions for the candidates, we do have someone monitoring the streaming sites, and any questions posted there will be considered for asking at the very end of the questioning portion of our forum. Candidates will also have 1 minute at the very end of the evening to give a summation or present closing remarks. So let's start with Lindsay. She's going to give the icebreaker, and the order that I have the candidates in is Peter, Wes, Natalia, Christian, and Greg. So
Okay.
go ahead, Lindsay.
So for the icebreaker question, what is the most recent book you have read, and what was an important takeaway?
Oh, wow, right down to brass tacks. Well, first off, thank you to the League of Women Voters. Thank you to the library, to our media partners for hosting us this evening. And thank you to all the viewers for joining us. I hope this doesn't sound pandering, but honestly, the most recent book that I've had time to pick up and read is just the Bible. And, for me, faith is an important thing, and it really does guide how I look at issues and how I try to just approach everyday life. If you haven't, I encourage you highly to pick it up and take a read. There's a lot of good things in there. But one big takeaway that I think is more germane than it is the idea of civility, and particularly in public service. I think that's something that we can all heed and take note of. Just being compassionate to one another, looking out for our neighbors, treating those around us as we'd like to be treated. So again, my other reads are much less, as our time is very, very much taken up these days with a kiddo, a campaign, working multiple jobs. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Wes?
Yeah, thanks for everybody for being here, especially those of you out there in the cyberverse informing your votes. Most recent book I read was The Hobbit to my 6-month-old son, Ren. We finished about a week ago, and I would say I learned that I'm better at singing the dwarf songs than I thought I would be. I've read it a number of times to myself, but reading it out loud, it was just so much fun to put him to sleep every night with that book. The most recent book I've read for myself is a book called 1,000 Days. It's about John F. Kennedy, written by Arthur Schlesinger, who's a historian, my favorite historian. I'm a history major. And he was actually Kennedy's secretary when he was president. And, you want a little inspiration as a politician, pick it up.
Natalia.
Thank you. The most recent book, besides reading to my children too, that I've read cover to cover is, unsurprisingly, You Can't Spell Truth Without Ruth. And my favorite quote recently from Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been enduring change, lasting change happens one step at a time. And the other book that I have not yet finished but have been reading is called Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny by Kate Mann. Thank you.
Christian.
Well, so the book that we're reading at home right now is It's Not the Stork, which has been an interesting bedtime read for our daughter who's about to turn 10. And then the last time I actually had a chance to read was in the Wind Rivers, and I read The Four Agreements, which I highly recommend. And the four takeaways, the four agreements are: be impeccable with your word, make no assumptions, take nothing personally, and try your best. And those are really nice things that I've been trying to incorporate into my life.
And Greg.
I've almost completed Harold and the Purple Crayon when Cora lets me. Actually, that's true, but I'm also almost finished with a book called Custer Died for Your Sins by Vine Deloria. It's about the Native American experience, written by an actual Native American, and how they have just had to deal with I guess I would call it the invasion of the white man on their land. It's very interesting. I think it's very pertinent to these times as well. This book was actually written, I believe, in the 70s, so it's a fairly old book, but it's very applicable to some things that are going on in our country right now as well.
All right, next question comes from Billy.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. There's some really good recommendations in there. I'll have to revisit Harold and the Purple Crayon. That was a personal favorite of mine growing up. Yes. So I guess for those who don't know me, I'm Billy Arnold. I'm the county reporter at the News and Guide, and I'll be asking questions tonight along with Robin and Lindsay. And just to start off, I mean, we are in a general election, and I think it's already been mentioned, but anybody who watched Tuesday night's presidential debate could probably come up with like a few choice words, adjectives for how to describe it. I'll use the word indecorous. And this question is about leadership. There are a number of issues that are polarizing members of our community right now. The two that come to mind are the response to COVID-19, where mask wearing and mandating mask wearing became hotly controversial, and policing, where the idea of defunding the police has set off fresh debate, and in some cases led to some pretty sharp words, at least from going by the News and Guide's Facebook page. My question here is, like, what is the role of a leader in a time of division, and how do you think you would embody that?
So Wes gets to answer that one first.
Yeah, I think I watched about as much as I could take of that debate, maybe 10 minutes. And it frustrates me that that's the world we live in these days. When it comes to COVID-19 and our response, you know, I'm a local business owner. I own Teton toys. So I kind of had to make some decisions right off the bat. I think it was May 17th, we reopened, and we really didn't have any guidance. I mean, I can tell you that none of the businesses really had any guidance. And we made a decision I made a decision to require masks. And I'm proud of that decision. I did a fair amount of research, learning about the transmission element of COVID, and how it, you know, the likely transmission methods through air droplets. And so masks do a good job of preventing that. If I were a commissioner, I would have pushed for a mask ordinance for the county much sooner than July 20th, which is when we finally got it. When we talk about policing, as soon as things started to blow up after the George Floyd incident murder, I went and talked to Police Chief Todd Smith. He and I have a good relationship that we've built over the years, and I asked him a lot of point blank questions. Hey, what happens when this goes sideways? What happens when an officer gets too hot? What happens when? A lot of what happens when. And he walked me through their protocols, and I can tell you those protocols were gold standard. as far as I can tell. So I knelt next to the man at the George Floyd Memorial, next to Chief Todd. So I know where his heart lies, and I think that you can support Black Lives Matter and you can support good policing at the same time. As a matter of fact, I think that those ideas are absolutely congruent. And if you don't have good cops, you're going to have problems with bad cops.
Okay, Natalia.
Thank you. When I think about how we need to handle polarizing issues in our community, a few things come to mind for me and for what I think leadership should look like. First and foremost, I think we need to debate ideas, but not debate people. And that means we have to come to the table with tolerance and with a willingness to listen to each other, but we also have to facilitate a place where all voices get to be heard. I also think that we need leaders at all levels that take accountability for their actions, that respond to situations that occurred prior to their tenure, also with accountability, and that we need people who will listen. We have to have leaders who are willing to listen to all sides of an issue, that may have a perspective coming in, but are willing to check that perspective and see what other people are thinking and bring all of those considerations to the table. I think we are lucky in this community to have access to our local government and to our local elected officials, but that is something we as government should not take for granted. And so when we see that there is a constituency or a group that is not being heard or that is trying to get access but can't, that we intentionally set about making sure that access is there. Thank you.
Okay, Christian.
Seems like it's hard to find an issue that isn't polarizing in this day and age, at least at the national level. And that's one of the great things about living in a small community where you're accountable to your neighbors and your friends. And I think, with COVID, my wife's a doctor, so we talk a lot about public health and the issues that the medical community is confronting here. We have Dr. Travis Riddell, and he's providing us very good direction on some of the health considerations that have come up in this upside down time with recommendations from the health department. I respect those tremendously. I would have acted more decisively and more quickly on the mask ordinance, but I do have a lot of respect for his input and his guidance. Regarding policing, I am supportive of the interagency task force. I commend Sheriff Carr for agreeing to participate. And I think sometimes we can get into a false dichotomy of us versus them, and particularly in a community of this size. I don't feel that that is where we need to go, and I don't feel that it's a helpful place to go because we have the capacity to sit down and discuss issues. And one of the key considerations for our leaders is that ability to come in with humility, not assuming you know everything, but listening, and then sometimes standing back and allowing other folks to step forward who might not otherwise have a voice.
Okay, Greg, it's your turn.
Thank you. I believe that good leadership is somebody who listens and is willing to listen to all perspectives and let those voices that maybe are less heard or that maybe you don't necessarily agree with be heard. There's a lot of great perspectives out there. And I think when you take an amalgam of great perspectives, we get to a better place. So that's how I've sort of led my term is listening to a lot of people and a lot of perspectives. And I feel like it's been working for me and ultimately for the community. Regarding policing, I absolutely support our local law enforcement agencies. I am also one of the commissioners who voted to bring forward the law enforcement task force, which the sheriff has agreed to participate in. I look forward to seeing what the synopsis out of that task force. We actually are doing the interviews for the people that will be on that task force in a week or so, and I very much look forward to that. And I want the people that are not represented as much to be able to voice potentially community issues that maybe we can become better. But overall, I respect the police force within Teton County, and rural policing is a lot different than urban policing. And, I think there's a lot of issues systemically within our country, but the defund the police movement's not a one size fits all solution. And we got to take each case with its own and look at the situation and the issues surrounding it.
Peter, go ahead.
Thank you. This is a very timely question. And for me, it really boils down to a simple truth that leaders lead, both with their actions and with their character. I think at the local level here, our local leaders really set the culture or help influence it largely. And that's why it does matter, who you're voting for and who we're putting into office. I think a lot of the frustrations that we see across our community and that we see nationally are really the result of people not feeling like they're listened to or not feeling like they're heard. And also people feeling that their quality of life isn't getting better. And again, so much of that just boils down to the local level of, what are we doing to make a difference in people's lives? What are we doing to ensure that individuals from every corner of our community are heard? I think over the next 4 years, one of our big challenges at the county level is going to be rebuilding partnerships in every direction. And that starts with building relationships with our community. I think every corner of our community should have a seat at the table, should be able to be part of the process, and should be sure that their voice is heard. And, I've said it before, everyone in here deserves a seat at the table, because if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. And as we debate these really weighty issues, we absolutely need to do a better job of pulling in every demographic within our community, coming together. Greg said it well. We benefit as a community when we have a diversity of voices, diversity of views, helping create solutions.
Okay, Robin is going to ask the next question, and Natalia gets to go first.
Thank you to all the candidates for joining us this evening. I'm Robin Vincent. I'm the news director at KHOL Jackson Hole Community Radio. We're going to focus for a little while on one of the most pressing issues here, and that is the housing crisis. So last year, the battle over affordable housing at 440 West Kelly showed us that building workforce housing here can be a difficult exercise. That plan angered a group of neighbors. They didn't want increased density on their street, and those neighbors divided elected officials on how to move forward. But there was a lot of public support, and the town rezone and the comp plan directed development there. Should those neighbors' wishes have been granted, or was this a case of a not in my backyard mentality influencing housing policy?
Thanks, Robin. This is a way to start off the housing questions with the question that we deal with every time we have a housing project. I think that change is hard, and it's hard for everyone. I see it with my kids, that it's hard for them when things change. But I'm confident in the policies and practices we have in place for zoning. We have planned for the type of zoning that is to either incentivize or create affordable housing. And it's our job to execute on that. And we set out with our housing plan to create housing and buy lots, if we were purchasing lots that were zoned for housing at the outset. And so I think we absolutely have to take stakeholders into consideration in projects. But at the same time, I feel like we have been clear about where zoning was headed through the comp plan and through zoning updates in the town and the process that they went through in the town. I also think we've learned things that are being implemented into future projects in terms of the process from where a project starts and how it comes to evolution and how people are brought to the table. Not suggesting that we're always going to get 100% buy-in on every project. I don't know that that will ever happen. But if we can keep people as informed as possible and see what input there can be and how we can make a project the best that it possibly could be, I think that's a worthwhile endeavor and ultimately generates the support overall for housing efforts in the Valley.
Christian, your turn next.
Hold on. How's that? Well, housing is something that we're all struggling with, whether we're business owners or whether we're folks that are just moving in or been here for years and still struggling to just make ends meet and make the rent. I look at some of the Latino families that are spending 60, 70% of their paychecks just to pay for their rent. And one of the things that I'm proposing is a moratorium on new hotels, because we continue to talk about our housing crisis. We continue to try to come up with solutions that don't polarize the community. And yet we're not necessarily talking about the creation of the demands on those housing. So we continue to build hotels, which bring in more visitors, which requires more infrastructural investments, and it requires more employees. And then we have to find places to house them. And so it perpetuates a problem that we still haven't figured out. We've got to get on top of the root of the problem before we can actually move forward on some of the solutions that are available to our workers. And the solution that I'm proposing is a moratorium on new hotels until we're able to successfully house 65% of our workforce, as we've agreed to do in the comp plan.
Greg?
Thank you. This is a good question, and the example that Robin used, 440 West Kelly, is the nuances behind that is also interesting. That was a housing authority project, so it's a joint project between the town and county in the town's jurisdiction. You know, having 10 electeds in a room trying to settle on the number of units and essentially almost micromanaging a project just doesn't really work. And at the end of the day, the county and town agreed that we would get full ownership of a parcel, or gain title to a parcel of land, the Rains property, and that the town would be able to move forward with the development of, or the development decisions of 440 West Kelly. You know, it's difficult to, as a county commissioner, I don't necessarily want to be involved in making jurisdictional decisions within the town, and vice versa. I believe that the town should be making those decisions in town, and we should be making zoning decisions and development decisions in the county. But at the higher level, when it comes to the housing authority, and we're having those sorts of conversations, I think that, you know, we as two bodies of elected officials need to come up with maybe a better process, working with the housing authority to get us through some of the sticking points that may have to do with neighborhood pushback, if you want to call it NIMBYism. And, you know, it takes courage and strong leadership to get there.
Peter.
Thank you. Well, I think it'll come as a surprise to no one that we absolutely have a ton of NIMBYism here in Teton County. And there's this prevailing mentality of, you know, we need housing, we need to keep our workforce here. But when the rubber meets the road, you know, so often it's, you know, these special interests, or it's people who have a vested interest in the area who say, oh, you know, well, not here, not this isn't right. And eventually we just have to start asking ourselves, if not here, where? And if not now, when? The reality is that the status quo is quickly pushing out our working class. And we can't just keep pushing these issues down the road and hoping for piecemeal solutions to try to rectify our housing problem. You know, I think what it boils down to is we need leaders who are going to make those tough decisions and step on the toes when necessary, but make the hard calls that are right for our community and that are going to answer our community's needs. I've said this before, I'll say it again now. I'm running to be a one-term commissioner, and for exactly this reason. I think that we need leaders who are going to stand up, make those hard decisions, take the arrows for it if necessary, but do what's right for our community and quit pushing these issues down the road, or quit doing the calculus on what this means for re-election down the road. And the very short of it is, we know that our working class is hurting. We know that they're getting pushed out. We know what's right to do for them and what's right to do by them. We need to just start doing and quit pushing these things off further.
Wes.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I ran this race 2 years ago, and running again, I engaged with a lot of our local leaders of local organizations. And every time I asked them, hey, what can I do? What's the most important thing I could do to support your organization? Whether that's folks in the mental health and human services community, whether that's local law enforcement, whether that's firefighters, whether that's teachers, whether that's nurses, the answer is always the same. It's housing. You talk to the people in charge and they say, we lose good people every month because we don't have adequate housing. You talk to business owners, same thing. There's nothing more perilous for a member of this community than housing insecurity. So when we talk about housing, I agree with the comp plan that we should place that housing density in and close to town. That's the appropriate place for it. With the 440 project, I think that was an interesting place to start for the local governments. For one, it's a neighborhood that's full of single family homes. It's really the first apartment style unit to go into that neighborhood. Second, there's already a residence there. So is it the most efficient use of our resources? And are we better off taking advantage of other opportunities where there's not already a residence there? I felt April Norton, she's the housing director. I felt her frustration in one of the town council meetings when she suggested, the debate was between 8, 12, 16 units. And she said, hey, look, a private developer could come in here and do 16 units. And you're telling us that we only are going to do 12. That's complicated. And that's something that I struggle with as a decision maker. I think we did end up at the right number with 12, and I commend our local governments for getting there. But I don't think that was the best place to start at 440.
Okay, the next question is coming from Lindsay, I believe, and Christian will start off the answers.
Okay, so this kind of goes along with housing, but it is inevitable that seasonal workers will always be a large part of our economy and community. Often, their living and working conditions are not great. What steps would you take to protect seasonal employees and make seasonal employment and long-term residency go hand in hand, as well as cut down on high turnover rate? How will you make our area a more sustainable place to live?
Am I muted? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's a great question. I think, so many of us were seasonal workers here for a number of years, and it's a juggling act, and it's a struggle, and it's something that is always weighing on your mind when you're trying to figure out your housing and you're trying to move ahead in your career. I fell hopelessly in love with this place, so I don't feel like I ever really had an option. I had to figure it out. But I would say that one of the things that we have to do is create not just affordable housing and deed restricted housing, but affordable rental properties as well. That's a really key part of the consideration. I think the other thing that we have to be talking about are ways to invest in our economy so that we're creating a diversified economy and one that is not as reliant on hospitality. We also, again, have to get back to these issues of sustainability. We continue to develop, and every single development on its own can feel innocuous, but in aggregate, it's ending up in these degradations to our ecological integrity that's impacting the quality of life of this place, the quality of place that we're providing to our visitors, and the quality of the model that we can present to the world of how we can live in a sustainable relationship between the built and natural environments. So where I'm very concerned about our community is that we continue to bend over backward to meet all the demands without looking at what the developments that result are going to do to the long-term viability of this place. Those are the considerations and conversations that I will be putting on the table as county commissioner. And they're ones that we've been avoiding for too long. And they are directly related to the carrying capacity of this place, the quality of life for those of us who live here, the quality of experience for those who visit, and so importantly, the quality of this ecosystem, which is our golden goose and the foundation for everything that we're here for.
Greg, go ahead.
Thank you. It's a great question. A couple years ago, we removed seasonal workers out of our mitigation equation and only looked at year-round, the year-round workforce. But we do need to address the seasonal workforce. You know, currently Teton Village is looking for, I believe, a master plan change to allow for some more dorm style housing for seasonal workers. I think that's a good idea. As Christian said, we need to continue to focus on the rental market as well. I think that's super important and is going to be necessary as we move forward. But the other thing is we need to make it less onerous for business owners to be able to potentially build some housing for their seasonal workers. Potentially that could also be deed restricted housing that is for seasonal workers. It may, maybe they get some sort of density bonus, or if they have that, those units only in the rental pool for seasonal workers or long-term rent, that they could actually maybe build another unit on their land if they have that capability. But we need to open up the spectrum of different ways that businesses and potentially other developers can suit the needs of the seasonal workers. And I believe that, you know, looking at North-South Park or infill in town where there could be some opportunity to build some density. Another thing that we could look at is maybe the community goes into buying some of the old hotels, and we remodel those and create some more dorm style living for seasonal workers.
Peter?
Thank you. So, Teton County is a tough place for working families to make it, whether you've been here 5 generations or 5 months. And we see it with just how transient, especially among our young people, this community is. And that's a sad thing, because that's really the fabric of what makes this county special. We talk about how do we make this place someplace where seasonal workers can afford to live. I think we have to recognize that rentals are a big part of our housing solution. And to that end, I'd love to see some more creative ideas about how do we incentivize people who own here to be renting to people who are seasonal workers or trying to get their toehold here. One idea I would love to see is how do we incentivize people to rent out ARUs to workforce here, and whether that be incentives to build ARUs on people who have property that they can do so, or whether it's existing buildings, some kind of structure, tax structure otherwise, to use carrots to help people start changing their usage and, again, keeping more of our workforce here. Also, we've got to be cognizant that our local government can't do it on its own. We have to build those partnerships with the private sector, use the tools that are at the county's disposal to help businesses here create housing for their workforce, knowing too that businesses have a vested interest in keeping their workers here and attracting and retaining good workers. And then finally, aside from housing, I think we have to address the rising cost of living here in Teton County. Over the past several months, I've talked with too many families who have said, hey, we've been here 15, 20 years. We've rented, we've tried to work our way up, but the reality is the cost of living here is just pushing us out, and we're going to have to move. One thing I want to talk more about this evening is this idea of an affordable insurance option. It's significant savings that's in the back pocket.
Peter,
Hardworking
sorry,
families.
I'm going to cut you off there.
Sure, thank you.
Wes's turn to answer the question now.
Yeah, I moved here as a seasonal employee and struggled with housing back in the late 90s. And I was living in garages and tool shops and wherever I could find a place to rent for $300-400 a month. So I'm familiar with the problem. I'll also say that our off seasons have shrunk. As a business owner, I can tell you that I don't really have seasonal employees anymore. I basically employ people year round because I'm busy year round. I do think that one of our strategies should be to work with local business partners like JHMR to incentivize them to house their employees. And I'm all for dorm style units. What I'm interested in is helping businesses create the type of units that make sense for the type of employees that they employ. For JHMR, that makes sense. For a resort like Snow King, that makes sense. I was following that process through the town, and Snow King talked a lot about, hey, can we create some dorm style units? And town said, that's not what we're interested in. I thought that argument made a lot of sense, frankly. I think we need to deploy a new type of housing, which we do a good job at deploying affordable housing for our middle to high end folks who need it. But for the folks who are at the lower end of the income spectrum, we've got to do a better job. That means we got to bring more funding to bear in order to create that affordability. We've got to build cheaper units, denser units, and funding's the critical issue when it comes to housing. And I've got a lot of ideas on that. I hope I'll have time to explore them later in this discussion.
Natalia.
Thank you. I agree that seasonal workers are likely, or seasonal jobs are likely to be present in our community indefinitely. But I don't think that they always have to be seasonal workers, and that we can work both to continue to shrink off seasons, but also really think about how we can use the tremendous asset that we have in Central Wyoming College, and how we can invest in higher education and careers and in things that bring a significant return to the community. We've seen success there in meeting needs in healthcare and nursing. And I think we've seen success there in the culinary arts. I know there are opportunities for early childhood education in that realm, and that there are likely others. So it's my hope that as we look to building careers and not just jobs in our community, that create well-rounded opportunities for families and create pipelines for our workforce to grow their own opportunity and the community to benefit from that. Thank you.
Okay, the next question will be asked by Billy, and Greg will be the first one to answer it.
I think I'm actually going to give Robin a go on this. I think her question is more in line with the discussion we're having.
Sure. Go
Thanks,
ahead.
Billy. So we've been talking a little bit about short-term rentals and about the off-season shrinking. We know visitors right now and remote workers are continuing to pour into Jackson. And so that leads me to a question about short-term rentals. An Airbnb search that KHOL performed in April showed available rentals that appeared to violate Teton County's land development regulations. The county prohibits short-term rentals in most areas. And further, a public records request that KHOL filed for a 15-month period showed the county had followed up on just 12 enforcement cases, and several of those were from the same offender. So I wonder if any of you think that a lack of enforcement could be exacerbating the housing crisis and what should be done about it.
Yes. I absolutely think there's been a lack of enforcement. I know that the county planning department who deals with this enforcement has had some staffing issues. We've restaffed. I believe that position is filled now. The other thing that I think we need to look towards is there are some services out there, national services, that actually scrape the internet and help find these rentals that are these Airbnbs that are illegal and notify whatever jurisdiction they may be in. And I think we need to maybe take more advantage of that. I believe the town of Jackson actually has or uses those software platforms. So do I think that it's exacerbating the housing issue in Teton County? Maybe. And the reason I say maybe is because I believe that probably a handful of these homes would never get rented out to a long-term renter. Maybe they're second homes where somebody wants to rent them nightly a couple times a month, but they want to come and the owners want to come and go as they please, and they don't want to have long-term renters in there, or long-term renter, or these homes are just, they don't want that demographic of person living in their home. But at the same time, there potentially are homes that easily could be rented long-term that the homeowners have chosen to VRBO. And that's where I believe these software platforms could maybe help identify who's violating our LDRs, and we could get somebody out there to inform them that they're in violation. But yes, it's definitely an enforcement issue, but I'm not going to say that by solving our short-term rental issue with people in violation is going to solve our housing problem.
Peter?
Thank you. Yeah, I think very simply that these short-term rentals are putting a drain not only on the businesses, hotels, and otherwise that are contributing to our community, that are creating jobs, that are paying taxes. They're also pulling away from really from the public good, in the sense that, again, these these short-term rentals, I assume, aren't paying any lodging tax. The visitors there aren't paying their share to mitigate their impacts here. And so, very simply, yes, we need to do a better job of enforcing codes and making sure that offenders aren't continuing to offend, that we're correcting the problem. I think there are a lot of practical solutions in terms of technologies to monitor that, ways to keep eyes on things. But also too, I think it's a carrot and a stick situation where, yes, let's have the penalties there for people who are breaking the rules and who are, especially if they're repeatedly breaking the rules. Let's also figure out ways to create incentives for those individuals who are doing short-term rentals. How do we turn their behavior to use that property to help meet our housing need? And again, I go back to this idea of how do we create incentive programs for people with ARUs or for homes that they're only here seasonally, programs that they might rent those out to individuals who are in need, so that we're actually answering our, not only correcting the problem of short-term rentals, but actually answering our bigger housing question.
Wes?
Yeah, when opportunities exist to capitalize to the extent that property owners are able to currently on their investments in Jackson to the tune of $10, $20, $30,000 a month. I've heard these kind of numbers being thrown around. Look, those owners are gonna do what they can to capitalize on that. And if there's no enforcement, or if there's not enough enforcement, they're going to continue. Does that have an impact on our housing supply? You better believe it does. I just bought a house in Game Creek, and we moved, and our other property, you know, some folks were like, you should short-term rent that. And I'm like, that's not within the rules. And I had just today, honestly, I had a doctor reach out to me and say, hey, can I rent your 800 square foot house? And I'm like, nope, already rented it. But the idea that this does not affect our housing supply, when doctors are looking for places to live, yes, it does affect our housing supply. It definitely does. I think it's critical to understand the community is not getting any benefits from these visits or from these rentals. We're not collecting any lodging tax from. We're not collecting any kind of revenue from this. You know, this brings me to one of my favorite talking points, which is what I like to call the maintenance of a law. You know, and this exists across all government levels, involving all legislation. We have a tendency in this country to craft a law and then walk away from it. We have to maintain the laws. And it's not just simply scraping the internet for VRBO. We have to do more than that. And I would argue that a more appropriate body in the county to deal with this is the housing department. They have compliance standards, and they could apply the compliance standards that we craft to this problem as well.
Natalia.
Thank you. So right now, as you've alluded to, the county has a complaint-driven compliance process, and you know those then can go through certain avenues within our LDRs. We've certainly moved into abatement on certain activities or properties on various issues. And I think we want a level playing field. And if a neighborhood is expecting certain activities, that's one thing, but when they're not, it's another. And I think that there should be the complaint process, and that those should move forward as appropriate. I think we do have to find and strike the right balance of technology or tools or resources available to us to proactively monitor versus what we currently have in place, because our resources are not unlimited. And I tend to agree with the discussion that the homes in the county that we might be talking about are not likely taking housing stock away from the workforce. And if there are, I know that legislators have talked in the past about ideas to incentivize renting those to local workforce. I don't know how effective they would be, but I think getting creative on solutions like that could be interesting. And that we should continue to look for ways, if they are going to be rented within the legal parameters of what is allowed, to make sure that we are capturing any revenue that should be associated with that. Thank you.
Christian?
Band-aids. Can you hear me? We're talking about Band-aids and we need surgery. I did a survey of the community to figure out where we stood on our current situation. 75% of people in this community feel like we're headed in the wrong direction. 75% feel that their quality of life is less today than it was 10 years ago. Across the board, people prioritize the ecosystem as their #1 priority in this community. And yet we continue to make concessions to all the demands on this place, understanding that those concessions are these incremental cuts on the thing that is the foundation for why we live here, the foundation for our economy, the foundation of why people visit. So we can talk about ways to enforce the violations, or we can talk about a master plan that has enforceable rules, incentives, and protections, which by clearly delineating expectations lower the risk for all the stakeholders. We can talk about ways to allow the developers, the renters, and the landlords alike to understand exactly what the playing field is. But we have to define that playing field for ourselves. And we need to have a very frank conversation about where we want to be, not just in response to these needs that are so immediate and so pressing and so often feel like crises, but how the implications of our ways of responding to those affect the long-term ecological integrity of this place. For over 100 years, people have taken care of this place. It is the crucible of conservation. That was a deliberate and conscientious intervention by our community. We stated that this place matters, and so we invested in it. My concern now is that we are not making similar investments, and our needs, our knee-jerk reactions to try to address these immediate problems are causing environmental degradation that will have long-term implications. As County Commissioner, I will put those long-term implications first.
Let's see. Billy, are we going back to a question from you? Okay. And the first one to answer will be Peter.
Great, thanks, Dee. So my question has to do with Northern South Park. And on Tuesday, the County Commission voted down the Gill family's proposal to rezone 74 acres of their land for a housing development in Northern South Park in favor of neighborhood planning the area before rezoning it. There were a number of questions about the proposal. There were questions about the affordability. There was questions about who in Teton County could afford the homes, who they were for. There was a question about wastewater. But there was also 300 plus units on the table, 65% of which would have been deed restricted in some way for the local workforce. And obviously that's a lot of units. So for Commissioners Macker and Epstein, you both voted against the rezone. Could you explain why? And for the candidates, I know Peter, Christian, and Wes, I've seen you all at meetings. I think you've been following it fairly closely. How would you have voted and why?
Thanks, Billy. This is a great question. To your last point on that, I very simply would have voted in favor of the zone change request. Listen, it's a shame that this was denied. And sadly, it follows a trend of continually moving the goalposts on good opportunities that come before the commission and letting what ifs stand in the way of really good opportunities to build housing that our workforce needs. And it also sends a very dangerous message to any other landowners here in Teton County that no matter how well considered a project is, no matter how well planned, there's a chance that the process is going to be ugly, that they're going to get dragged through the mud. And at the end of the day, the evidence shows it. The likelihood is that they're going to get to know. At some point, we just have to ask when and where. And, I look at this and we can parse all day, the affordability and the deed restrictions. Listen, this was the largest gift of affordable housing to the county, 65% deed restricted in some way, another gift of 90 units to specifically for affordable housing. And I know there was some frustrations with this idea of kind of workforce market deed restriction. And we can parse it all day. I can say for a family like mine, right, that falls above the below, but below the upper, we don't qualify for government assistance for housing, but we're a long way from being able to spend $1 million on a house here. And so this was a really good opportunity to meet a broad range of our community's needs. And, we can talk, for every reason why it was the right location, why it's the right time. I think we have to just consider too that too often, I think the county, oftentimes people within our community think that, we can push these opportunities down the road and they're going to be there for us. What we heard loud and clear from the Gill family is that that's not the case. The Gills and the Lockharts are both looking at the reality of estate taxes. And we're not afforded as a community the opportunity to say, okay, let us dictate the terms and figure out every small piece, and we'll get to this. And when we get to it, the reality is we have to start embracing these opportunities instead of kicking it down the road while our workforce is getting pushed out of our community.
Okay, Wes.
See, Christian's got a red thing up, ice axe, it looks like.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Go ahead, Christian.
So Peter, I have a question for you. So we sat in with the Conservation Alliance. We had Dan Heilig there talking about our water issues. And when we asked how would the Northern South Park development affect our water, our sole source water aquifer, what Dan told us was that no plans had been put forward to address wastewater management. As a result, the town has not agreed to allow any development on Northern South Park to tie into the town's wastewater management system. There are severe implications for the nitrate hotspots that are occurring around our community. There are also cost implications that are not paid now, but will be paid later if the EPA is forced to intervene the way that they did in Hoback. So my question for you is, how can you push for this immediate development, understanding the long-term implications for the health of our residents and the financial well-being of our community if the EPA intervenes and we have to fix this problem?
I'm going to give Peter a minute and a half to answer that question, even though technically that's not really how we do this, but go ahead, you got a minute and a half.
I appreciate that. Well, Christian, thank you for the question. And, I don't disagree with you, right? Our water quality issues here, I think, are most pressing. Next to housing, I think, is one of the most pressing issues here. The Gills, to their credit, they planned this to be able to hook up to the town sewage and wastewater treatment. Expect the town to come along and help meet them there, come to the table on that. I think it boils down to, we've got to also learn to walk and chew gum, right? I mean, the horizon on this, it gives, before the first house is put into the ground, we're talking years until that actually happens, if several years. And, absolutely, I think in tandem with that, we do have to start addressing the water quality issues. We have to look at expanding our sewer and our waste treatment facilities. But to say, hey, there's a challenge before us, that's, on hand, we can't, the Gills have already done what's right in terms of being able to hook into the town sewage and water treatment. I disagree that, that we couldn't reconcile those things, and we couldn't, knowing too that the Gills have a vested interest in making sure that it's done right. That's for that's for ranch, that's for heritage. They want to make sure it's done right too. So very simply, I think, we have to be able to address these issues in tandem.
Okay, now back to Wes with the original question.
I want to start off by thanking the Gills for coming forward with their proposal. I want to thank them for the additional units they tacked on at the 11th hour that were going to the Housing Trust, a wonderful local organization who would be a great recipient of those units. And I hope that we can manage to bring that back into the equation. I did speak against this proposal at a planning commission meeting about a month ago. And I did so because I'm worried about a number of things. Most significantly, there are no assurances in the current proposal of permanent affordability for our workforce. There are at the 11th hour, the Gills talked about some reduced prices on a number of the lots. That's great for the first-time buyer. Not so good 20 years from now. It doesn't really have any impact at all 20 years from now. So I couldn't support it. I would have voted against it. Further, I think Christian brings up some good points. When we talk about infrastructure, what is an appropriate response is a comprehensive neighborhood planning process for this sub area. And we're talking about an area that goes well beyond what the application was for. When we talk about infrastructure, we need to talk about roads, we need to talk about parks, we need to talk about bike paths, we need to talk about water, and we need to talk about sewer. The more that you get engaged in the county conversations, the more you realize that water is a critical element, and it's in peril. There are folks in Hoback who can't drink their water. It's critical that this development ties into the town's sewer system. And the final element that needs to be discussed is conservation. For me, I'm all about creating wildlife thoroughfares through this sub area, so that there's wildlife permeability through our development. If we're serious about housing 65% of our workforce locally, and I am, this is an opportunity we need to take advantage of, and it's an opportunity we need to get right.
Natalia.
Thank you. As you alluded to, I did not vote in favor of this rezone request. And I think we have the opportunity to get this right, and that we can't afford not to put in the work as a commission, as a community, to plan this area as well as we possibly can. We have 2 landowners signaling that they're ready to go. Both of those landowners or their representatives can be on the steering committee for the neighborhood plan. And I am eager to get started on that. I think we all are. We set an aggressive timeline that I look forward to making sure that we meet, and that we look at this as an opportunity to think about our future differently than we have thought about our past. You know, the zoning tool that was brought forward had to be the tool that was selected because that's what was available, and we need new tools. We've talked about that multiple times with different things in the county, and we see the need for it, and this is where we are. We are tasked with considering the whole community and the impacts on what this will do for schools, for infrastructure, for social services, for our other community services. And so we can't afford not to take the time that we need to plan this area and build something that we'll all be proud of. Thank you.
Christian?
Great. Okay. Well, Peter, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but we were sitting in that room, and it's such a serious consideration for our health. It's such a serious consideration from a financial perspective. We're talking about a situation that you talk about kicking the can down the road. We'd be handing our own community a bill we cannot afford if we're unable to address our nitrate contamination and the EPA steps in. And to be really clear, we have not addressed our nitrate contamination. And if you look at the costs that are incurred with Hoback, with fixing the water situation there, 2005 prices, they were saying it was going to cost $9 million to fix. By 2010, that had gone up 70% to $13 million. We still have not fixed it. My concern is that we are setting up our community up for a bill that we cannot afford. And that bill is both a financial bill and it's also a health bill. The health considerations of nitrate contamination are severe. So when I support the neighborhood plan, I want to know damn well where that wastewater is going to go, because if it goes into our single source aquifer that we all drink from, and suddenly Jackson Hole is akin to Flint, Michigan, that isn't good business. It isn't good health. It isn't good financial sense. And it isn't good for the long-term viability of our community. That's why I'm really concerned about this. I don't know if I answered your question.
Greg, go ahead.
Thank you. You know, obviously I've been right in the middle of this for the last couple of meetings, but this conversation revolving around the Gills proposal has been going on for 6 months or so. Simultaneously, and potentially a little earlier, as we started talking about the amendments to the comp plan through the growth management plan, we've pushed to want to include sub-area 5.6 within the growth management plan. And, you know, there's been a lot of back and forth between the town and county on how that should be managed and how that should be looked at. And, you know, ultimately we came up with this neighborhood plan that the county is leading. It was a hard fought battle politically between the town and county just to get there. And then simultaneously, the Gills are bringing this proposal together. They knew that we were doing this neighborhood plan. I believe that the commission asked them to slow down, asked them to take a pause for a minute, maybe collaborate with us. They chose not to. Sitting through those meetings, the first meeting that we had with them, we asked a lot of hard questions. We had a good conversation, but you know, we were ending up having to conditionally zone the ARTC. That would just open, it's rife for litigation. So that would have just locked things up. Additionally, just so many unanswered questions regarding everything that's been talked about regarding wastewater, transportation, infrastructure. And finally, you know, in good faith to the town, we needed to go through this planning process as well, because they are the linchpin to the sewage system at this point, unless the county wants to go and build another sewage system. So we need the town partnership. We also need the town partnership for infrastructure, whether it's roads and things like that. They're adjacent to town. So we just had to do this. I know that it's been disappointing and frustrating for a lot of people in the community to see that we voted against it. But at the end of the day, we're going to have a much better plan. It's going to be better for the conservation of our entire community. And I really look forward to being part of it.
All right, Lindsay is going to ask the next question, and Wes will be the first one to answer.
I'm going to pass this question off to Billy. He has a good one about our water quality issues.
Yep. Sorry for flip-flopping on you there, Dee. Yeah, so a question while we've been talking about water quality in the context of Northern South. And Greg, you brought up the comp plan update. In recent weeks, the comp plan update, a lot of conversations have been had at the Planning Commission, at the Town and County Planning Commission, as they're reviewing this document and moving it towards the elected officials, have centered around water quality. And as different candidates here have alluded to, Teton County is experiencing a number of different water quality issues, from nitrates in the groundwater to E. coli in surface water to nutrient pollution driving algal blooms. And in that recent discussion that came from the Town and County Planning Commissions, both of those bodies recommended creating, and this is a quote, a community-wide comprehensive water quality enhancement plan with, again, quote, sufficient staffing and resources to enforce the framework. My question here is, do we need to overhaul our comp plan and planning and zoning regulations to emphasize water quality protections? Or can these issues be addressed one by one? I want to thank Mike Koshmerl for helping me put that question together.
We need a comprehensive plan when it comes to water. Unequivocally, I'll answer that. Nothing matters as something like water, people take for granted until all of a sudden you can't drink it safely. And unfortunately, that's the circumstance we find ourselves in today. We are having to be reactive instead of proactive with the most critical resource in our community. And that's beyond unfortunate. That's disappointing. Our water quality in Hoback is such that we have 10 parts per million nitrates in that water. And the issue is that our septic tanks are located in inappropriate places for large swaths of the county. We have 3,600 septic tanks in this county, and most of them, it doesn't matter how well they're maintained. A lot of them are not being maintained very well. We have no standard of maintenance that we enforce throughout the county. We need to start there. We have great organizations in this community when it comes to water quality maintenance. And we need to take advantage of those relationships. Specifically, the Conservation District has taken a distinct interest in this, and for good reason. And that they have monies to bring to bear on this problem. But getting back to septic tanks, when they're located in areas of our river plain with a high water table and semi-permeable rock membranes, the leachates seep right into the aquifer. And as Christian's mentioned, we have a sole source aquifer. Well, it means we mess it up, we can't get it back. So absolutely, the proper channel is through a comprehensive water quality plan study. We need to get on top of this. We need to get proactive. And I support everything that those groups are trying to do to get us ahead when it comes to protecting our water.
Natalia.
Thank you. I look forward to working on and learning how to best integrate the feedback that we've gotten thus far, but I completely agree that we do need to take a comprehensive look with water quality, with wastewater management. I think the situations that we are in today are because we were doing okay when we were making decisions, or decisions were being made with the best available information at that time. but we are now in a place where we have tipped over the other side. And I think we do see that repairing that is costly, but I also think we need to be realistic that the infrastructure investments that we are likely to have to make to really future-proof our water endeavors are going to be significant. We're going to need partners across our community and with our state, and that we need to see this as the urgent issue that it is and begin addressing the hotspots and the problems immediately while doing this comprehensive planning. And I think we need to be sure that we continue to take this education and equity lens. As we've watched some of the issues in Hoback unfold, I lived in the neighborhood that's been at the center of this. And we have to make sure that we are getting good information to people and teaching them about all the things that are going on with their water and encouraging people to test their water. People can be very proprietary about their private wells, and we need to make resources available to get the testing that people need, to incentivize that, and to make sure that the size of someone's bank account doesn't influence whether or not they have clean water. Thank you.
Christian?
I fully agree we need a comprehensive wastewater management plan. But beyond that, we have a comp plan right now that doesn't have any teeth. And we're just hoping that folks will use it as their moral compass when making decisions. Problematically, development has a really strong lobby. And so as a result, we're making all these incremental concessions to protecting this place. We have to come up with not only a comprehensive wastewater management plan, we need a comprehensive master plan that has rules that are enforceable, that clearly delineates expectations so that developers understand what they're getting into. And all of this leads back to this golden goose of ours. We are not taking care of it. The legacy of this place is taking care of it. That's why we are the crucible of conservation. So that is why I've called for a conservation director to help us ensure that all the decisions that we're making in our elected offices that affect the long-term sustainability and ecological quality of this place are informed by science and are also enforced. And having that enforcement there will clearly define those expectations for everybody involved so that we can get on board as a community with the absolute imperative of protecting this place the way that our ancestors have done so that we can hand it down to our children and they have a Jackson Hole, at least a little bit like the one that we've had the privilege to enjoy.
Greg?
So again, back in December when we were starting to discuss the growth management plan and the comp plan updates, I proposed that water quality be one of our #1 priorities, and that water quality actually was probably the closest measurement to the ecological health of the region in our community. And I can't remember where it landed, but I know that it wasn't in the top priority. I know we were talking about climate change as well and the importance of that. But my feeling is that water quality definitely correlates more to the health of our community. Since then, the county has allocated money to some water quality projects and some studies. The Conservation Alliance is doing a great job. Protect Our Waters is doing a great job. But I agree, we need this comprehensive water quality plan. We need to look way more closely at our sewage and private septic tanks. So many of them are below the water table. That's a huge problem, as Wes mentioned, and we need to jump on this quickly. I mean, this is just snowballing as more and more people visit our community, and as more and more people continue to move here and live here. It's just going to snowball more and more. So, I would like to see in the near future that we have a real conversation about putting sewage infrastructure in the county on a SPET ballot. It's going to cost a lot of money, but it's going to be necessary for our community's health long into the future.
Peter?
Thank you. Yes, I absolutely support a comprehensive water quality plan. And this is one area I think that we need to really start heavily investing in and making a priority with our dollars. Our water quality, the health of our waters is the health of our environment. Our entire valley relies on a single source aquifer, and that affects everything that every part of our community, every part of our local valley here. I think no one in Teton County would disagree that, we need to protect our waters. Many of us rely on them for our livelihoods. All of us enjoy them. And again, they're the bedrock of our larger ecosystem here. So absolutely, we need to have better standards of maintenance. We need to up leak protection and detection, and making sure that those systems are there to not only to correct the problems we're seeing now, but that we're getting ahead of it. And then finally, we need a remediation program, a comprehensive remediation program to start immediately cleaning these up. I agree with everyone here. This is a defining issue for our community. I think community-wide, we need buy-in to make sure that this is, we're getting ahead of the problem, not just correcting the immediate needs, but also getting ahead of it for future generations.
So technically, we have enough time for about one more question, but I was going to ask our participants if they mind if we try to squeeze in 2 questions, just go a little bit longer. Is that all right with you all? Okay. Greg, you wanna use your red card?
I want to just add on to the water quality conversation a little bit more. Another thing that I really feel that's going to be important as we move forward is the incentives to get people to move off of their sewer systems, or, how far does a countywide sewage system go? Does it go to the last quarter mile? Does it go to the last eighth of a mile? Who pays for the tap that the private citizen's going to have to pay for to tap into a municipal or countywide sewer system? These are questions that I think we should all really be thinking about as community leaders. I look at everybody on this panel right now as a community leader, whether you're on the county commission or not. You guys are influencing peers around you and people around you, and this probably is the most important issue that all of us can talk to constituents, and I don't think it's very divisive. I think it's important, and it's about public health. But things are just they're coming fast, faster than we know. And again, there's some great studies going on. We need to bring everybody together under one umbrella, so that there's not a lot of redundancy going on. And I just really passionately feel that this is going to define the next 10 years of Teton County.
Okay, so I'm going to see if Lindsay wants to ask the next question. And the first person to answer would be Natalia.
Okay, so I want to open up the conversation to transportation. The Tribal Trail Connector Project, an approximately half-mile long segment of road, would connect Cherokee Lane North to Highway 22. The project, I believe, is in the concept design process, with 3 more votes to come before construction can begin. I know for some incumbents, you've already supported this project, but I would like to hear who supports the project, why or why not, and how do you think this project will impact traffic and potentially solve congestion issues at the Y intersection in town?
Thank you. I have voted in support of the project thus far and in the process, and 3 sounds right in terms of how many we have left. And I think what we've seen so far also is that each new phase of the process illuminates new information and brings new things to light and new opportunities to the table. So I am in support of continuing to move this process forward. I think that when we think about transportation generally, that denial cannot be our strategy, and we cannot simply do nothing. but no single project is going to be the answer to anything that we do. And so I think it will produce positive benefits depending on how you see how it works. If you're comfortable sitting in traffic for 45 minutes while you're trying to get home to meet your kid from the school bus, great. If that doesn't work for you because you have multiple jobs, or you need to get there because your kid cannot get off the bus if you were not there, it might not work so great for you. And so I think we have to continue, when we think about our transportation processes, to bring the stakeholders to the table. If we are going to move forward with a project, any project, get it the best that we possibly can, balance all of our community interests, whether that's wildlife crossings or pathways, and at the end of the day, make our decisions and move forward so that we can address what is impacting the quality of life in our valley.
Christian, go ahead.
This is one I've got an opinion on. You know, the tribal trail connector, it's difficult to get actual information from the planners on exactly how we expect that it will alleviate some of our congestion problems. But if we're looking at it and doing the estimates, we can assume that it'll cut down commute time from the village to over by Smiths by around 60 to 90 seconds before the law of induced demand takes over and it fills up. So one of the things I'm so concerned about with our community is that we have these immediate needs that we always consider to be immediate crises. And we're making decisions that have long-term implications that we're not taking into consideration. And those long-term implications will affect the quality of this place, the quality of life for those of us who live here, and the quality of experience for those who visit. So when I'm looking at a situation that the Tribal Trail connector is purported to address, why are we not talking about smart traffic lights first? Why are we not talking about roundabouts first? There's two bottlenecks. One's at Spring Gulch, one's at the intersection of 22 and 390. Roundabouts would assist and alleviate the congestion there when it backs up. So when we go immediately to creating new roads that go through precious wildlife habitat, this taps into, and Wes, we were talking about this earlier today, this is a global problem. Fragmentation of habitat is leading to the 6th mass extinction. And if we can't address this in a way that is inspired by this singular land, enough to be creative and enough to address the problems without adding to the problems down the road, who can? And if we're not going to do this now, when are we going to do it? This is our opportunity. This is our legacy. We need to step into it and be just as creative and inspired as the generations that came before us.
Greg.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on Christian's comments, regarding things within YDOT's jurisdiction. Believe me, if we were able to do some of the things that you have brought up regarding smart lights and roundabouts and other traffic calming or traffic controlling devices or implementations, I think that we would have already tried them. But this is a long-term conversation with YDOT to get some of these amenities that are also in line with the values of our community. So it's not easy. It's not, but it's a constant conversation with people down in Cheyenne. Getting back to tribal trails, I have also supported it so far. I think that the planning so far is working. I'm not going to say that, as we move forward, that I will always support it. It may turn into that it turns into a byway or something that just doesn't fit the neighborhood scenario that I envision in my mind. But I do see this as a form of redundancy that is necessary for our community. But there's a lot of questions regarding how it's going to interface with Highway 22 and also with Coyote Canyon and Indian Trails Road. So still a lot of questions up in the air, but up to this point, I've been supportive of the process.
Peter?
Thank you. So tribal trails is one piece of our larger transportation system, our larger transportation picture here. I do support getting it done. Listen, the easement to build this has been on the books now for 30 some years. And here we are still, talking about whether or not, it's right or wrong. Very simply we know that it's going to create much needed redundancy that the comp plan specifically calls for. And it's going to alleviate congestion along the Y at that choke point. Now, oftentimes you hear this argument of induced traffic put out as a reason against this small stretch of road. I just disagree with that. The idea of induced traffic is built around the idea that if you put in new development, that then commercial and residential development is going to come up around it. There's just no place more for development to be put in around this. It's literally providing a road that's going to help alleviate and redirect traffic around a central choke point. Now, all that said, again, this is one piece to a much larger transportation puzzle here. And so I think we do need to be looking at this in conjunction with all those other pieces of public transit, of parking, of pathways. If we're talking capacity, let's look at smart lanes of high occupancy bus lanes. So that we're not, just simply building roads for roads, but we're actually reducing traffic, we're getting cars off the road, and we're changing drivers' behaviors.
All right, Wes.
I take issue with the idea that all new roads are just by necessity bad. All new roads are going to cause more congestion, more development, more confusion. That's not the case necessarily. Now, I'm not for new roads generally speaking, but when we're talking about a half-mile of road that can create redundancy, that can create efficiency for our road network system, yes, you better believe I'm for it. When we talk about redundancy, what we're really talking about is safety. Okay, so a couple years ago, we had an emergency at Suburban Propane. There was a fire at the place where we store all our propane. And guess what? It's right next to our schools. So there was mass confusion. I remember driving to town that day, seeing giant plumes of smoke going, what is going on? And there was an entire generation of Jackson Hole youth stuck back there because there was only one way out. And we need, if travel trails had been built 10, 20 years ago when it probably should have, that traffic would have had the opportunity to flow out. So redundancy isn't just a word we throw around. It really is impactful when we talk about community safety. Now, road network efficiency is something that means a lot to me because at the end of the day, the efficiency of our road networks and the efficiency of our transportation system, our transit system, are the critical elements, I believe, to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, reducing our vehicle wildlife collisions, reducing our congestion, the time we spend in the car to get from point A to point B. I'm committed to doing whatever I can to resolve those issues. And this half-mile of road can reduce vehicle miles traveled by thousands of miles a day. That's something I'm committed to. It's been platted for 40 years. Let's do the environmental studies and let's get it done.
Okay, the last question for the evening is going to come from Robin, I believe, unless things are switched up a little bit. And Christian, you'll be the first one to answer.
Thanks, Dee. So Jackson is facing a problem that's playing out across the nation, and that is our Latinx community has been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Many in the Latinx community don't have the luxury of working from home. They're on the front lines working service industry jobs. A lack of affordable housing has also made it tough. The housing crisis forces people to live in cramped spaces, as we know. What actionable steps will you take to address this problem?
I appreciate the difficulties that the community is experiencing. However, I do have to say something about redundancy is already in place. We already have the Tribal Trails Connector. The Homeowners Association of Indian Springs has already offered to use their roads in the event of emergency. And Greg, leadership is tough. Yeah, just because something is difficult doesn't mean you just give up and walk away. It will be difficult to make the sort of inspired decisions that are necessary to preserve the quality of this place. But that's what leadership is, and that's what I'm prepared to offer. And Robin, regarding our Latinx community, one of the things that I've learned with my work at Shift is that we need to ask what the problems are from the people that are experiencing them, listen, and then step back and assist them in addressing them. And that's one of the fundamental precepts that I bring to my perspective, my work with Shift, where we work on this all day long. COVID in particular has really exacerbated the mental health issues that we're experiencing as a country, but the more vulnerable among us are experiencing them at much higher rates. They also have less access to resources, be they human resources, medical resources, and that holds true here as well. So in 2 weeks, I invite you to come to Shift, where the entire focus is on the mental health benefits of time outside, and we have a specific focus on equitable access to those benefits, because the people that need them the most are often the least often to get them. Thank you.
Greg?
Thank you. Yes, Christian, leadership is hard. But it can be it can also be beneficial, and it can be amazing. Anyway, I think there's a couple things that we can do. One thing right now in Teton County is we don't have access to the rapid test across the county. The hospital offers it, but you have to be symptomatic, and there's a couple of other stipulations. So I think by having the rapid test, that would be helpful for a lot of people in the community, and I think especially people living in closer quarters, because they could immediately know that they need to be quarantined or, you know, stay away from other people, other things like that. I think building trust within the community. I think that the Latinx community still has trouble trusting whether if they go to the hospital, they go to the doctor, they call fire EMS, how the response is going to be. So I think we need to continue to work on building trust within the Latinx community. You know, right now, talking about affordable housing, I think that's it's hitting the Latinx community hard, but it's hitting our entire community. It's difficult for a lot of people, but you know, we really need to just look at COVID now in this point in history, and do the best we can, continue working with the Department of Health. And I know that they've been working their tails off trying to get as much supplies for any kind of test they possibly can. They're doing surveillance testing. But I think it comes down to the Latinx community trusting that the system will work for them.
Okay, Peter.
Thank you. Well, first, our Latinx community is a critical part of our community. Sadly, one that is not well represented, and so often those members of our community feel like they are on the margins, that they're not integrated into our community like they should be. And you know, as a community, our local government particularly, we can do better to pull them into the fold, to ensure their voice is heard, and to really start meeting their needs better. You know, one thing I'd love to see would be a advisory committee, as we have with, you know, a number of different stakeholders around our community. It really does serve as a channel to communicate issues facing that demographic to our local government. And also to be a channel both ways, right? To help better communicate things that will affect that community down to, and then help communicate those concerns from the community up to those elected leaders. And some of these things are just common sense changes, you know, posting government meetings, our commission and town meetings, when members of our community can be there, particularly the Latinx community. We should be providing translation in these meetings. We should be providing meeting minutes in Spanish. We should be ensuring that the decisions are being communicated, of what decisions are made and what impact they have on our community, that's being communicated clearly and in plain terms to everyone in our community. Finally, I'll keep this short, seeing the 30 seconds here, but healthcare, the Latinx community is hit hard by the COVID crisis. One thing I would love to introduce is a affordable health insurance option that will provide people who are uninsured, underinsured, the resources they need to confidently go get care. And that's just critical to, especially to our Latinx community.
Wes.
Yeah, our local leaders have got to step up to fight for the least privileged among our community. We're only as good as the access we provide for the folks who are most vulnerable among us. And in this instance, we're talking about health and we're talking about housing are the two critical issues when it comes to combating this issue. And there's no doubt that the folks who are public facing during this COVID crisis are the ones who are facing the disease head on. And mask requirements are great. We need folks who are running the businesses that this community works at to make sure that the masks are actually being worn. I can tell you that I spend precious moments of my day reminding customers, put your mask over your nose, please. When we talk about when we talk about investments in housing, for me, it's about what are our funding streams for those investments. In order to make housing affordable, we have to bring funding to bear. I have a number of suggestions. I'm for increasing the lodging tax. I'm for the seventh penny. I'm for the exploration of a real estate transfer tax. These are all mechanisms by which we can raise funding that we can then turn and deploy right into creating truly affordable housing units. I'm also for creating a $1 million levy for our mental health and human services professionals. They shouldn't need to continue to come to ask for funding from the general funds of our town and county, just like the library, the hospital, the school system, and other organizations in our town. They are critical health service providers and should have a dedicated funding source that they can budget for year in and year out.
Natalia.
Thank you. Thank you for asking this question. We have to address this immediately. We need to start getting ready for winter now. It is a privilege and a luxury to suggest that we can go outside as a means of stopping the spread of COVID over winter. And to suggest that our solutions for that are going to come in the long term does not demonstrate this community taking care of the people it needs to be taking care of. We have some systems in place right now that we developed rapidly in March, including housing for quarantine. There are new programs that are getting started. I believe they may have been deployed now to utilize community mobilizers within the Latinx community to share information from trusted sources. I think that's starting with 122 and the Community Foundation and the Head Start program. And every single one of us that has the privilege and luxury of working from home, of not having to worry about where our next meal is coming from or that our children are going to be safe, we have to stay vigilant and we have to do our part to stop the spread, because the numbers that we are seeing here, the numbers that we are seeing reported nationally, particularly with children and children of color, are staggering, and we need to do better. Thank you.
Okay, so I lied. We're going to have one more question because Billy has a really good topic. And the person who goes first this time is Greg. And then I promise you guys can sum up your evening.
Thanks, Dee, and thanks for everyone for sitting through one more question here. This question is about transparency, and you guys, hey Greg, you guys read the news and guide. We wrote an article about the basic and basically submitted a public records request, and found out that commissioners have been texting each other, members of the town council, and the public during meetings about Northern South Park. Bruce Motes, who's a Wyoming public access attorney, who it's worth noting has represented the news and guide in previous public access lawsuits, said he thought that behavior could be, and this is a quote from him, a violation of the spirit, if not the letter, end quote, of Wyoming's public access law. In a nutshell, that law prohibits meetings from being conducted, and this is a quote, from being conducted by electronic means or any other form of communication that does not permit the public to hear, read, or otherwise discern meeting discussion contemporaneously. When I was talking with the commissioners about this, Commissioner Mark Newcomb, who is not here tonight, he's incumbent and will not be running in this election, said he would support looking at some sort of texting policy for the county commission. And this is for all the candidates, incumbent or not. Would you support some sort of texting policy if you were elected to the board? And if so, what would that look like?
Billy, people could just read the story you wrote. Joking aside, I don't think I would support a texting. It's freedom of speech. You've got people, constituents, they have the right to text me if they have my contact info. They have the right to email me if they have my contact info. They have the right to call me. They have the right to ask me to come to a meeting. And yeah, I guess if we're talking about being in a meeting, you know, some people text me and they don't even know I'm in a meeting. Some people do. I don't necessarily respond to them. I think if you were talking about texting amongst board members or elected officials, I think that we all just need to know that that's frowned upon, and that, you know, there could be another FOIA of sorts, and that, you know, but it's a little bit of personal responsibility when it comes to things. I mean, there are times when we're texting back and forth and it's about scheduling. I mean, or it's about, you know, where are we meeting or things like that. It's not, you know, and a lot of times, you know, frankly, we're not texting back and forth about very many material things if we are texting back and forth at all. Like I said, you know, there's nothing that would be different. This is a quote from the newspaper article. If two commissioners during a 5-minute break had a little aside conversation and came back and then proceeded with the meeting. So no, I would not be in favor of any sort of texting policy. I just think that it's our personal responsibility to know the open meeting laws, and we can self-regulate.
Peter.
Thank you. You know, sure, I guess I would support a some kind of texting policy. You know, from what I've seen, I don't think this is any kind of nefarious, you know, sleight of hand that our commissioners are doing anything, you know, under the table. That said, I mean, sure, to make sure we're within the letter of the law and the intent of the law. Sure, I mean, let's have a you know, refresher on, you know, what cell phone use, what texting use is with, you know during public meetings. But, you know, I think more than anything, with the heart of this issue is this, that, you know, our community, residents, voters here deserve accountability from their government, just accountability and transparency from the government in terms of just the whole policy making process. And, you know, we can always be doing better in that regard of communicating down what decisions are being made, what impact they're going to have on our community, and then also to how our community can be part of those decisions. Again, we benefit when every corner of our community can come to the table and be part of the process and can be sure that their voice is heard.
Wes?
I think it's important that we have protocols in place as to what's appropriate and what's not appropriate from our elected officials during a public meeting. And I would suggest that communication, as material communications, between elected officials during a public meeting is inappropriate. I don't believe that. I do believe in communication. That's one of the platforms on which my campaign rests, is the idea that we need better communication between our elected officials on a board and between our elected officials from the town and county and beyond. We need better communication with the private sector. But during a public meeting, when you're doing work, is not the time, it's not the appropriate time, I believe, to engage in those communications with other elected officials. I've actually been in contact with elected officials during public meetings when my opinion has been sought on different issues that that I have detailed understanding of. And I appreciate that. And if I'm chosen to be your next commissioner, I would want to have the freedom to reach out to experts in certain fields when I'm approaching a decision point. I just don't believe that. I believe that when you leave the door open for elected officials to speak with each other through private communication, as that decision point is coming up, the minutes are ticking down literally in the middle of a meeting. That's not really appropriate. There is appropriate times and places for those conversations to take place, but not then.
Natalia.
Thank you. For me, what I think this issue underlines is that whether it's texting or anything else, that we must ensure that we don't do anything that erodes the public's trust in its institutions. Our democracy demands high ethical standards from its elected officials, and we should undertake steps to ensure that that's the case. Do we need to talk about norms around texting or expectations for the public so that they know also what to expect and appropriate channels for reaching us? Sure. I think that would be a healthy discussion, and that may result in something as formal as a specific policy or norms that the board can consider so at the beginning of every 2-year period, we adopt rules of meetings and consider all of those steps. Absolutely, I think that will be on the table. I think the other thing that's really important is that we have to make sure, from my perspective, that everyone in the public has equal access. And as we've seen technology shift with COVID and with meeting virtually, we've also seen members of the public trying to make public comment in a chat. Well, that's not recorded anywhere. And so we have to make sure that those things and I've tried to communicate back to the public, if you want this to be on the record, you have to send it by email. But maybe we need to make sure, as we're going to probably indefinitely be using new tools for communication, that we are evolving our norms and that everyone has that access. I try to be very public about my phone number. I don't want someone in the public to think that they are not able to reach me to share their thoughts just because they don't happen to know me personally. It's why several years ago, I started holding open office hours in the county building where anyone could just show up or schedule a time if they wanted to have a time, so that it isn't just based on who you know or what your relationships are, but that we really are able to be accessible to everyone. Thank you.
Christian?
Rise in darkness. I support a ban on digital communications by elected officials during public meetings.
All right, now we can move on to closing remarks, and we'll start with Peter.
All right, well, thank you again to the League of Women Voters, to the Teton County Library, and to all the media partners who are broadcasting this tonight. And most importantly, thank you to everyone who is tuned in and watching. This election is critical for our community. When you go to the polls, you will decide whether we're going to settle for more politics as usual that continues to kick our challenges down the road while our working class is getting pushed out, or whether we will elect leaders who will embrace opportunities to address our challenges head on and stand up and fight for you. So let me talk to the hardworking men and women who are watching tonight directly. I'm running to be your voice. As a small business owner, a husband, a father, a fourth generation Teton County resident, I know what it's like to work multiple jobs and to struggle with the rising cost of healthcare and childcare, only to feel like that dream of being able to call Teton County home is getting further and further out of reach. As your commissioner, I pledge to work with you and for you to truly move the needle on the issues that matter most to you. And I promise to listen and be accountable to you. Together, we can make Teton County a place for our working families and for our kids and future generations. I'm asking for your vote when you go to the ballots on November 3rd or before. And I encourage for anyone watching, if you have questions, please reach out. Our website is longfortetoncounty.com. Thank you for everyone. Appreciate being here tonight.
Wes.
Yeah, I want to echo those thanks to the League of Women Voters, the Teton County Library, and you, everybody out there paying attention. Really appreciate your time this evening. So who are you going to vote for? If you vote for me, you're going to be voting for a business owner who knows how to value public dollars. I contribute thousands in revenue to our state, local, and federal governments, and I understand what it takes to raise those dollars, and I will make sure that they're being spent appropriately. If you're electing me, or if you're electing a local board member who has worked to unite this community, I believe that only through productive compromise can we generate meaningful consensus, and only through meaningful consensus can we achieve our community goals. Look, at the end of the day, I'm a moderate independent who's committed to finding middle ground solutions for the benefit of our community. If you, like me, you're electing a member of the public who has striven to have his voice heard in public meetings. I promise to listen to you with consideration, even if we disagree. I'm always open to new suggestions and arguments. As an independent candidate, I take my responsibility very seriously to let you know who I am and what I stand for and what my plans are for this community moving forward. In that spirit, please visit my website, gardnerforcommissioner.com, on which you'll find numerous positions, deep dives into things like funding, housing, traffic, local law enforcement, health. And I hope you'll take the time to dig deeper into me. This is a critical election. I hope you'll be able to support me.
Natalia.
Thank you so much. The work I see before us is truly the work of advancing equality, and that needs to touch on all of our policymaking, whether that is water quality or climate action or childcare or housing. We have been caregiving as a community for the last 6-8 months, and we cannot leave people behind. I believe that if we do continue to care for each other, and I mean everyone in our community, we will foster the thriving ecosystem that we all want to maintain and enhance. I also know that we're all tired and frayed and stretched thin and burnt out, no matter what you do for work. It has been a trying year. And I think hopefully what we've all seen is that normal wasn't working for us. It wasn't working for our neighbors. And so I want us to seize this opportunity to make things better. We found innovative ways of supporting each other. We've built new bridges of collaboration across sectors, and we should capitalize on that. I hope that you will join me in doing the hard work necessary to achieve a stronger community for all of our friends and neighbors. I truly believe that if we want to make our nation and our state better, we have to start right here at home. I ask you to join me in this work and vote Natalia Macker for Teton County Commission. Thank you.
Christian.
Thanks to all of you who are running. This is the first time I've done it, and it's truly daunting and awesome to look under the hood of this community and try to figure out how to make it run better for all of us. I've fallen hopelessly in love with this valley, and I'm doubly fortunate to share that love with my wife, Jovanina Anthony, and our 9-year-old daughter, Soleil. To be able to live here, raise a family here, watch them weave themselves into the fabric of this community, and then talk about it over dinner at the kitchen table, that's a privilege. With great privilege comes great responsibility. The responsibility to make sure future generations have that opportunity too. This community has given me everything I care about. My friends, my family, my home. It's why I'm running. And it's why I'm ready to fight for the people who have called Jackson home for generations, who are building this town and have yet to see themselves reflected in its cultural narrative, or who came to Jackson for just a summer or winter and never left. We're not a normal town. The people who make Teton County their home are not normal either. A place this beautiful and characters this special deserve a spectacular community. Give me your vote and I'll fight like hell to keep this community as singular as its surroundings. Come with me, fight with me, and we'll build a place that keeps taking our breath away.
Right.
It's hard to follow up after Christian. I'm a husband, father, and small business owner. I was born and raised in Jackson, Wyoming. And I met my wife here, and my daughter is very lucky to grow up here in such an amazing place. This valley has been home to me and my family for the past 50 years, and I deeply care about our community in Teton County. During uncertain periods like this past year, continuity of experienced leadership is paramount. As a result, I decided to run again for Teton County Commission. I truly believe our community will come together, prevail, and be stronger on the other side of this health and economic scare, but it's going to require a collaborative effort and tough decision-making. Looking forward, I will continue to strive for an inclusive, safe, and healthy Jackson Hole. My voting record over the past 3.5 years, actually almost 4 years now, has shown that I am a fair, nonpartisan, practical leader who is not afraid to ask challenging questions, make difficult decisions, and steward essential relationships. Please consider my bid for re-election to the Teton County Board of Commissioners. Vote Greg Epstein.
Well, that concludes our evening, and I really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. And don't forget to vote yourself. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for taking the extra time.
Thank you.